Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and I'm bringing you another review for another system for another day. And I come to you fresh from farming minerals on far-off alien worlds in No Man's Sky to basically playing a Toyota-branded cross between Johnny Appleseed and the Pied Piper in today's little title called Grow Up. Grow Up is of course the sequel to Grow Home, an Ubisoft title from a year ago. Grow Up continues the tale of our robot with a green thumb. You know, in the first adventure, Bud, aptly named protagonist that he was, turned the Earth into one giant grow light, replacing the oxygen that was long lost on that homeworld. This time we see Bob head out for another adventure, but crap goes wrong almost instantly and quickly he's set loose on a new planet with a new task. And Grow Home is a platforming, climbing action game coming out on August 16th for the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. So let's see how the sequel did, shall we? As always, if you liked the video, maybe subscribe. So here's the review for Grow Up. Pink-loving, poison-filled vegetables not named Taylor Swift, the world's most inebriated robots, and a game that would make Assassin's Creed fear heights. Graphics are up first. You know, when I think about my time with Grow Up, it doesn't really instantly grab you, from the meandering walk of the lead character that reminds you a little bit of your friends in school whose bodies never grew up into their heads, to the world that at first just sort of looks like a neon flat-shaded polygon. For the most part, while it runs well, when in ground level, for me at least, it was just sort of But, make no mistake, Grow Up excels in the use of its game's location and the absolutely dizzying heights in which the game takes you, as well as really fantastic art design. Grabs you by the clankers pretty damn quickly. It's just that you don't notice it, mostly when you're on the horizontal. But when looking up or down in the game world, you really realize that few games handle 3D space as aptly as this. Hell, some space sims don't. Here, the feeling that you get in your stomach when you look down from miles in the sky and realize there is nothing between you and the ground but your hilarious, girly scream is actually pretty damn cool. And it also runs incredibly well. It had rock-solid frame rates on the 970 and the 1080. While it doesn't have a bevy of graphical options, what is lacking there is more than made up for, let's say, when you're looking at the double suns in the sky from this almost Dr. Seuss-styled game world. Animation, though, is once again procedural, and really, it's the only game where you rip the wheels off Johnny Five, slap some metal getaway sticks on him, get him drunk on 30 weight, and then send him out to parasail. It's like the ending of a bad idea generator on the internet. And add in the fact that everything's procedural, and sometimes you get some wonky animation. For example, sometimes the control felt flighty at best, with difficulty getting handholds, and one particular aspect always crept me up to bite me in the ass. When crawling up onto something and then trying to get onto a horizontal level, sometimes the game's just like, screw it, and just throws its hands up, and you spend a good deal of time fondling the rock face when you're trying to go from vertical to horizontal. As a package, I'd say the animation, color work, and overall artistic representation is really spot on for me. I love the entire worldview. Really, there's very little of anything that looks like this game, except, of course, the earlier title. Sound, music, and voice. And of course, sound is up first. It's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's excellent, but each of the plants have their own sound, of which there are 24, whether it's the whispered hush of these tentacles that'll send you flying into the air whenever you even think of getting close to them, or the ratcheting sound of the fungi as it prepares to slap you halfway across the continent. While it doesn't have the sheer fun of, let's say, Plants vs. Zombies, I think it does a pretty good job. Now, the few effects that are needed, like the moment you explore the dark caves within these floating mountains of impossibilium, have the right amount of echo and reverb. And there's this silent hush and a really crystalline quality to the sound effects when you're super high up and floating that makes you feel as if it is a really colder climate in which you're entering, and I loved that. I would say sound, pretty good. Music. So this was hit and miss in different ways. It's a little chiptune style, a little synthesizer, and then add in some light airy bells and some long synth vibes for the melancholy moments. And you would think you would have yourself a really good soundtrack, but it's a bit odd at times. You know how your friend plays that one song from the album that you like, but the song that you don't? Well, that's pretty much what was happening here. It might be weird because it seems dynamic, and yet at the same time, it really isn't. For a good period of the game, the same track played, which was fine at first, but by the end of the game, I was about ready to headbutt something. Hey, who knows, maybe the composer snuck in his favorite one and put it on repeat, I'm not quite sure. Now, the other tracks are all good, they all are, but I wish I'd heard them more. This, of course, might be a case of being in the wrong place for too long with environmental triggered music, but while playing it, I did not feel like I was locationally in the same place for too long, but that damn song, it just played and played and played. And of course, that brings us to voice. Now, while there is no real voice, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the sound effects that are voices in the game. While it makes no sound on its own, the main character warbles, oos, and occasionally makes mistake sounds. They're also played separately from any other actions, and those sometimes also at the same time. But they did more for adding emotion to this character than I expected, and it reminds you, let's say, of Pixar films where a character doesn't actually have any voice. Admittedly, I was really impressed by it. And of course, that brings us to the big dog, which is gameplay. So of course, like the prior title, you're on a planet engaging with the biological life forms, but this time it's to gather the pieces of your crashed ship to get to the moon so that you can fly away. Now, to do that, you take control of Bob and run, climb, slide, hover jet, ignore gravity, and grow your way to locations where your ship pieces lay. Also, there's really not any enemies, so it's something to remember here. Also, while the game's roots lay solidly in the platformer genre, there are times when you almost have a feeling like you're playing a flying game as you send Bud leaping and skipping across entire mountains. And I also love, once again, we have these developers who are sort of branching out. First, again, we see a game playing with the idea of replacing the typical guns with another kind of mechanic or item. I mean, look at Primo, it replaced all of the guns with a Michael Vick worth of fighting animals. Here, Grow Up basically replaces it with an assorted menagerie of botanical items, all which further the gameplay loop. For example, there's the Flight Bulb, which is a flower perpetually blowing bubbles that you can latch onto and float to victory on what looks like one of those cheap Walmart prisms that role-playing nerds love to collect. But there's also the Youch, which is about as on the nose as anything I've ever seen in a game. It's a giant ball of hate with prickles on it, and if you get close to it, it ends up poking you, but it also sends you flying. You know, what's so enjoyable about the game is that the gameplay loop and each location within it is really organic, and it sends you subtly higher and higher as you also gather more and more powerful plants. It's all in this perfect step, and it feels like there's no complexity there, there's just gameplay. Now, it isn't without its problems. Climbing continues to be a sore spot, as I mentioned before, and the drunken way in which the main character moves can be frustrating to some gamers. Think any other game when walking on ice, then that's this character normally, and it can only get worse from there. But what might even be worse is the fact that the button to scan a plant is X and the trigger on a 360 controller, holding them both. To drop a plant is X by itself. However, since the game many times will just think you're trying to grab onto something when you hit the trigger, you will inevitably drop plants right on top of other plants. It happened multiple times with multiple people playing. Now, this is fine unless you're like me and you're on top of a mountain and dropped a plant that continually sent you flying in the air while beneath it was the only plant that would allow me to continue further in the game. It was a very rare breed indeed, and I almost was not able to get it and not able to further myself in the game. I think the last thing I'll talk about is the save spots, which are stunningly stretched away from one another. In this case, they're called Teleportation Stations, which of course allow you to teleport, but they are mind-bogglingly far away from one another. Expect a hike like you have never seen. Now, you can alleviate that by spending time just unlocking those, or extra ones for sure, but that starts to feel very trivial, and it actually interrupts the gameplay loop a little bit. Now, that's a hard road to ride, and I'm not sure how they would or could have actually fixed it, but there are times when I almost chewed through the goddamn controller wire when I realized I was going to have to trek for 40 minutes because the teleportation device was in the Alien World version of Canada, and I was in Texas. Fun factor. Listen, the game has a lot of heart. It also has some problems. It's spectacularly colorful, and I really like the characters. Bud, your sidekick Pod, and of course, your spaceship mom. It's almost like everyone on the development team got done deciding the important crap and they left the naming up to the interns. It's not perfect, I get that, but it's actually very, very cool to play. Also, it's one of the few games in which I didn't get 100%, but I look back at it and I thought, you know what, I can return to play it and I wouldn't be bored with the gameplay, or I can walk away and feel like I actually really enjoyed a great little title. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. At a game like this, at such a cheap price, this is absolutely a buy. It has its issues. It's not perfect. It's not even close. Maybe some won't call it a classic. But for me, the time I spent within that game, I was completely and fully engaged. And that is something that even from some stellar AAA titles, I can't actually say the same for. So that's it for me. If you guys like the video, hit a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, hit thumbs down. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter, Reddit. You can check out the Patreon. Coming up in the next few weeks, you can see some awesome interviews I'm doing with the Mafia 3 composer and some other great interviews, as well as, of course, reviews and some more streaming. That's it for me. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.